Montana Territory. 1879, the wind blew hard across the dry ridge where the Gallatin River cut through pine and stone, and Susanna Granger stood barefoot in the dirt while her father signed her life away. She was 21, old enough to know what was happening, not old enough to stop it. "I told you I'd pay it back," she whispered, face pale, voice shaking. Her father looked away. "It is paid, girl. You're going with him now." His voice cracked, but he did not meet her eyes. The man waiting on horseback was twice her age, with 3 yellow teeth and a smell of old whiskey and cowhide. Jasper Rudd, a trader from the Bitterroots who had lent her father money he never could have paid back. Susanna's mother had died 2 winters ago, and the land had failed each year since. Jasper had been circling like a buzzard for months. "She is worth more than this," came a voice from behind. The crowd of ranch hands and townsfolk that had gathered around the stable grew quiet. A man stepped forward from the shadow of the livery post. He was tall, sunburned, and dusty from the trail, a rifle slung over his back. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and when he looked at Susanna, she felt the air shift. "I'll pay the debt," he said. "With my life if I have to." Jasper laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's so." "And who the hell are you?" The stranger took off his hat. "Silas Zane. I do not believe a woman should be bought like cattle." "She is not yours to speak for," Jasper growled. "She is not yours either," Silas said calmly. Then he looked at Susanna. "Unless she wants to go with you." She looked at Silas, her breath catching. She had never seen him before, but there was something steady in his voice, something that didn't ask, just offered. A choice. The first she had been given in a long time. "I do not want to go with him," she said, louder this time. Her hands were trembling. Jasper spat on the ground. "Then you come up with another way to settle this, Cowboy. Her father owes me." "I will stay," Silas said. "I will work for him or fight him, whatever it takes." But she walks away free. The silence held like a string pulled tight. Rudd snorted. "Fine. She goes, but you owe me now, and if I find you gone by morning, I will come after you both." Silas nodded once. "You will not have to find me." Susanna's knees nearly buckled. She had no idea who this man was, but he had just bought her freedom with his life. And she did not even know why. That night, they rode out past the town's edge, only stopping once the moon was high and the hills swallowed them in soft darkness. Silas built a fire with steady hands, not asking questions, not speaking more than needed. She watched him from across the flames, her dress still dusty from the road, her hair falling loose down her back. "You did not have to do that," she said finally. He looked up. "I know." "Why did you?" Silas stirred the fire with a stick, "because no one else was going to." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You do not know me. You looked afraid," he said simply, "and I've seen that look before. No one should have to live like that." She hugged her knees to her chest, heart pounding. "You said you'd pay with your life. I meant it." She looked away, blinking fast. The wind moved through the trees above them, soft and low. "I do not have anywhere to go," she said. "Then stay with me," Silas said, "until you do." Susanna looked back at him. His voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet promise. Not a man looking to own her, just a man trying to make things right. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "South," he said. "Toward Wyoming." "Got a brother's homestead out past Buffalo. I was going to help him finish building before the snow comes." She nodded slowly. "Could I come?" Silas met her gaze. Yes. She did not know this man, but something in her chest felt different now. Like the weight she had carried for years had shifted, even if just a little. They traveled together for days. She rode behind him on his horse, her arms around his waist, her cheeks sometimes brushing against the back of his coat when she dozed. He was quiet but kind. He gave her the warmer blanket at night. He found wild berries for her when supplies ran low. He never looked at her like she was something owed or owned. One morning, she woke before dawn and found him standing by the creek, shirt sleeves rolled up, washing his face in the cold water. The sky behind him was streaked with orange and gold. She watched him for a long time, her heart doing something strange in her chest. He turned and caught her looking. "You all right?" She nodded. "Yes, I never had someone stand up for me before." Silas dried his face with a rag. "That should not be rare." "It is," she said quietly, "for women like me." He walked over and handed her a tin cup of water. "Not anymore." She took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." They reached Buffalo 3 weeks later. His brother welcomed them, surprised to see Silas with someone. But he made room for her in the bunkhouse without question. That first night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Silas had stood between her and Rudd. The way he had not flinched. The next morning she found him by the pasture hammering a fence post into the ground. "I want to stay," she said. He looked at her and put down the hammer. "You can." "I mean, here with you." He took a step closer. "You sure?" She nodded. "You saved my life, but more than that. You made me feel like I was worth something." Silas stepped closer still. "You are," her breath caught as he reached up, brushing a piece of hair from her face. "I did not just do it to protect you," he said. "I did it because I already cared. I do not know how or when it happened. But I cannot imagine riding on without you now." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then do not." He pulled her into his arms and she leaned into him, feeling the strength of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. There was no rush in his touch, no urgency, just warmth, safety, and something that felt like home. He kissed her, soft and sure, and when she kissed him back, it felt like the end of one life and the start of another. One she chose, one with him. The first frost came early that year, pale and thin across the edges of the grass before the sun burned it away. Susanna stood near the chicken pen behind the cabin, sleeves rolled and apron damp, sorting feed from burlap. Her hands worked without needing thought, but her mind drifted. Silas had gone before dawn, riding out to help his brother dig a new well farther down the slope. He'd left a note scratched into the soft dirt near the hearth, back by supper, and a warm tin of coffee on the coals. His words, though spare, lingered in her chest longer than the heat of the drink. She'd stayed behind to tend the hens and gather kindling for the stove. His brother's wife, Miriam, had taken the wagon into town with their youngest, and the house was quiet but for creaking beams and the far-off call of scrub jays. It wasn't silence like the one she'd known growing up. This kind held space for breathing. That afternoon, she took her sewing to the front steps, mending a tear in the hem of Silas's shirt. The cloth was worn at the cuffs, the color bleached by long days under sun and dust, but she stitched carefully, setting each thread like it mattered. And it did matter, somehow, the doing of it. She hadn't had a place where her hands were needed in a long time. The breeze turned colder, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the far side of the ridge. She rubbed her arms and watched the road below. When hoofbeats rose in the distance, her eyes followed the curve of the trail until the outline of Silas's horse came into view, moving at a steady canter. There was another rider behind him, older, a man with a limp and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over graying hair. When they reached the gate, Silas dismounted and nodded to her. "This is Mr. Thatcher," he said, voice low from the ride. "He lost 2 heifers crossing the South Stream, thought we might help him track where they broke off." The older man tipped his hat. "Silas says you've a good head for signs. If you'd look, I'd be obliged." She set the sewing aside. "I can try. The banks out there get soft after the first frost." Thatcher's eyes squinted, surprised. "You track?" I used to follow my mother's goats through creek beds, she said, brushing off her hands. You learn to tell the difference between a hoof that slipped and one that meant to turn. Silas gave her a look she hadn't seen before, something quiet and sure behind his eyes. Not pride, trust. They left the horses and walked the stream on foot, the three of them moving through thin willows and scattered brush. She pointed out a broken stem near the waterline, the half-moon of a hoof angled westward, and Thatcher followed her lead without question. When they found the gap in the fence a mile down, he whistled low. "You were right," he said. "They crossed here," she nodded. "They'll be heading toward the burn scar, plenty of new grass there." He gave Silas a glance. "You hang on to her. She's worth 10 men out here." Silas didn't answer until Thatcher had gone ahead. Then he stepped close, not touching her but near enough to feel the warmth of him in the cooling air. "I didn't know you'd done anything like that." "I didn't know it mattered," she said. He looked toward the stream bed, then back at her. "It does." They walked back slowly, the sun dipping behind the ridge in streaks of copper and rust. She didn't speak, nor did he, but the silence between them was full. When they reached the cabin, she handed him the mended shirt without a word. He ran his thumb along the seam, then met her eyes. "I don't have much," he said, "but I've got space for you here, for whatever you want to make of it." "I want to stay," she said, watching his face. "Not just in this place with you." Silas's voice was steady. "Then it's yours." She reached for his hand. His palm was rough, the knuckles scarred, but he held her like something precious. Not fragile, just rare. The snow came late, clinging first to the shaded hollows between the cottonwoods, then gathering in light crusts along the fence rails. Susanna stood by the barn with her hands tucked beneath her shawl, watching Silas and his brother stack the last of the winter hay beneath the sloped roof. The air smelled of frost and old straw, and her breath came in soft puffs. When the work was done, Silas walked toward her, brushing chaff from his sleeves. His brow was damp, but his eyes were easy. "You feelin' ready for the cold?" he asked. "I think so," she said. "I patched the stove pipe last week, and Miriam helped me line the window frames." He nodded, then dipped his head as if weighing something. "I was thinkin'," he said. "Come spring, I could start clearing that patch west of the creek. There's good soil under the scrub. We could plant there. Maybe even build something of our own." Susanna looked up at him, heart thudding. "You mean a house, if that's what you'd want." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I want whatever means we stay together." He smiled, not wide, just enough to soften the sharpness in his cheeks. "Then I'll start soon as the thaw." That night, she sat beside him on the cabin floor while he carved a length of cedar into a handle for the drawknife. His hands moved with quiet purpose, each stroke measured. She watched the way the shavings curled, how the lamplight caught the edge of the blade. "Did you learn all that from your father?" she asked, her voice low. "No," he said. "He didn't make much. He broke things more often than not." Her hands stilled in her lap. "Mine used to shape wood when he was sober. He made a cradle once." "For a baby that never came." Silas paused, then set the knife aside. "I didn't know. I never told anyone," she said. "Seemed like if I said it out loud, it would make it real." He didn't speak, but he reached out and laid his hand over hers, warm and solid. She didn't pull away. "I never thought I'd want a child," she said. "Not after everything, but now, I think maybe I could." He turned her hand gently, pressing his thumb to her palm. "Only if you want to, not because you think it's expected." "I want to raise something in peace," she said. "That's all. Just something that grows without fear." Silas looked at her then, truly looked, as if memorizing the shape of her face with every breath. "Then we will," he said. "Not all at once, but slow, the way things ought to grow." Weeks passed under heavy skies. They moved through the days without hurry, each task a quiet rhythm, splitting logs, boiling lard soap, stitching feed sacks into curtains. They shared the same bed now, though there was no wedding band yet. No preacher had ridden through since the last frost, but Miriam said it didn't matter. "You belong to each other already," she told Susanna one morning while they strained milk into a tin pail. "Anyone with eyes can see that. The first time Silas called her his, it wasn't in any grand way. He was talking to the harness maker in town, explaining what size boots she might need come spring. 'My girl's got long feet,' he said, 'but her steps are sure.' And just like that, the word settled. One evening after supper, he handed her a small box carved from cottonwood. Inside was a plain silver ring, smoothed at the edge from wear. 'It was my mother's,' he said. 'Not much to look at, but she wore it her whole life, said it kept her grounded.' Susanna lifted it carefully, the metal cool against her skin. 'Are you asking?' 'I'm offering,' Silas said. 'No papers, not yet, but my word if you'll take it.' She slid the ring onto her finger. 'I've never trusted a name on paper, but I trust your word.' He breathed once, like something in him let go. Then he pulled her close, his arms around her waist, and held her there as the stove crackled and the night settled in. Outside, the snow fell in soft, slow drifts, and inside, the quiet between them twisted into something deep and lasting. There was no rush, no need to name it more than it was. They had chosen each other. That was enough. By late February, the bitter edge of winter had begun to ease. The snow no longer clung to the roof past mid-morning, and the creek behind the pasture had broken open in thin lines of moving, slate-gray water. Susanna spent most days tending to the root cellar, inspecting what was left of the turnips and onions, and setting aside the soft ones for the hens. Her shawl grew thinner as the light changed, and soon she began rising earlier, drawn by the feel of the earth waking beneath the frost. One morning when the wind was still and the sky hung low with cloud, Silas brought in a letter wrapped in butcher paper and tied with twine. He'd fetched it from the post rider who stopped by the loggers' camp twice a month. "It's from the East," he said, setting it carefully on the table. "Ohio postmark." She dried her hands on her apron and stared at the folded parcel. "I don't know anyone left there." "Maybe it's from someone who remembers you," he said, then stepped back to give her space. She opened it slow, careful not to tear the paper. The letter inside bore a tight, slanted hand. It was from a woman named Clara Wexley, someone her mother had known long ago. Clara had heard through someone who passed through but that Susanna's father had died the prior autumn. She wrote only to say she was sorry and that she remembered Susanna as a child with a sharp tongue and a kind heart. There was no request, no offer, just a memory sent across miles. Susanna set it down, eyes dry but distant. "I thought I'd forgotten all of them," she said. "You don't have to answer," Silas said. "I might," she replied, "just to say I'm still living, that I'm not what I came from." He reached across the table and touched her wrist. "You don't have to prove that to anyone." "I know." She turned her hand over, letting his fingers settle into her palm. "But maybe I want someone to know I made it." Later that day, she took a scrap of linen and stitched a small satchel to carry seed come spring. Miriam had given her a handful of dried peas and promised more once the ground thawed. Susanna sewed her initials into the strap not out of pride, but to mark it as hers, in a life she'd chosen. That evening, Silas came in with a scrape down his arm where a mule had kicked him trying to shake off a frozen tack. She cleaned it with boiled water and a pinch of crushed yarrow from the jar on the shelf. He winced, but didn't pull away. "Had a dream last night," he said as she wound the bandage. "You were standing in a field of sunflowers, so tall I couldn't see over them." She tied the cloth firm but gentle. "I've never seen a sunflower grow wild." "I haven't either," he said. "But in the dream you looked like you'd planted everyone." She rested her hands on his, the firelight catching the silver ring on her finger. "Maybe I will, come summer. You've got a way of turning things useful," he said. "Even a place like this." She smiled, quiet and sure. "It's not the place, it's who's in it." That night she lay beside him with the quilt pulled to her chin, listening to the wind push against the eaves. His breathing slowed beside her, steady and low. She reached across the space between them and laced her fingers with his. No one had ever written about what came after a girl was given away. No one had ever said it could lead here to a man who worked until his hands split, who spoke little but meant every word. To a house with a roof that didn't leak. To a future that stretched, slow and wide, like spring thaw across a frozen field. She closed her eyes and listened to the thaw begin. By early April, the ridge trails were soft underfoot, and the air had lost its sharpness. Susanna walked the western edge of the clearing, a basket looped over her arm, gathering the first shoots of wild onion pushing through the thawed soil. Her boots sank a little with each step, but the ground held firm beneath. When she reached the stream bank, she knelt and dipped her fingers into the water. It was still cold, but it moved freely now, no longer bound by ice. Across the field, Silas was working the far fence line, replacing a split post with one they'd hauled up from the lower woods. He paused now and then to lean on the shovel, scanning the slope as if measuring what more they'd need to do before planting. His coat flapped open in the breeze, and she could see the linen shirt she'd mended stretched across his back. She rose and made her way toward him, the basket swinging gently at her side. "You'll wear out that shoulder if you keep digging with it at the wrong angle," she said when she reached him. "There's no right angle when the post's half rotted," he replied, the edge of his voice warm. "I'll trade you a shovel for that basket if you're offering." She handed it to him, and he peered inside. "These'll cook up nice with the salt pork, if we can stretch what's left of it," she said. "I've been thinking we might trade for a side of beef before the season turns." Silas glanced toward the trail that led into town. "I could take the wagon down next week. Maybe stop at the mill and see if they've got any of that cracked wheat you liked." Susanna ran her fingers along the top rail of the new fence. "I've thought about going with you." He looked at her with a kind of quiet surprise. "I know you said you didn't want to be seen as someone's burden," he said. "I'm not," she replied, "but I'm not afraid of being seen anymore either. Not with you beside me." He set the basket down and stepped closer. "Then come. We'll take the long road, stop by the river on the way back." She reached out and brushed a smear of dirt from his jaw. "I want to show them I'm not what I was, that I've built something better." "You have," he said. "And not just with your hands." They returned to the house together as the sun began to sink behind the hills. Miriam was in the yard, rocking her youngest in a shawl-wrapped sling, while her eldest chased a chicken toward the woodshed. Susanna paused to watch them, her hand finding Silas's without thought. That night, he brought out the folded plans he'd drawn on parchment weeks ago. The tiny cabin they'd share once the thaw fully passed. He laid it on the table and pointed to a square marked in charcoal. "That'd be your root cellar," he said. "And here's where the stove would go. We'll need to haul stone for the hearth." She traced the lines with one finger. "And the loft, north end. There's enough space under the slope for a cradle if we ever need it." Her hand stilled. "I've been late," she said softly. He looked up, eyes steady. "Do you want to know for certain?" She nodded. "I do." They rode into town 3 days later, the wagon creaking under the weight of trade goods and the last of the dried beans. At the apothecary's, an older woman with hair pinned high and sharp eyes took Susanna behind a curtain and asked careful questions. When they returned to the wagon, Susanna sat beside Silas in silence until they reached the riverbank. He pulled the horse to a stop and they sat listening to the current. She said yes, Susanna told him. Late summer if all goes well. He reached for her hand. And do you feel all right? I feel whole, she said. Like everything I lost brought me to this. He didn't try to answer that. Just leaned toward her and pressed his forehead to hers. When they returned to the homestead, Miriam ran out to meet them, her apron streaked from kneading dough. Susanna helped unload the parcels while Silas took the horse to the barn. That night, they ate by lamplight, the smell of stewed onion and crackling fat filling the warm corners of the room. After the others had gone to sleep, Susanna stood on the porch and looked out across the darkened pasture. Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her middle. Next spring, he said, I'll plant those sunflowers you talked about, the tall kind, the ones that follow the light. She leaned back into him. And I'll plant beans along the fence. We'll eat better next year. We'll live better too, he said. Not just survive. Behind them, the cabin glowed gold through the window, and the stars had come out clear above the pines. They stood a long while like that, wrapped in stillness, until the cold sent them back inside. The snow never returned that year. The soil dried just enough for planting, and by May, green shoots lined the furrows Silas had carved with the plow. Susanna moved slower now, her belly beginning to round beneath her apron, but her hands were just as strong. She spent mornings tying string for the peas and afternoons stitching new linens from the bolts she'd traded for in town. By midsummer, the cabin Silas had built for them stood firm on the rise above the creek. The roof was straight, the stone hearth solid. She hung bunches of sage to dry from the rafters, and he carved a wooden cradle that rocked with the touch of a fingertip. They married under the cottonwoods one clear July morning, with Miriam's husband reading from his mother's old Bible, and the children tossing dried petals they'd gathered from the meadow. Silas kissed her once, slow and sure, and with that it was done. When the baby came, it was a quiet birth. Just after dawn, with the windows open and the wind moving soft through the room, a girl, small and perfect, her hair dark as creekstone. They named her Mercy, for what they'd both been given. That autumn, Susanna stood on the porch, the cradle beside her, watching the sun rise over the fields they'd planted together. Behind her, Silas brought out 2 mugs of boiled chicory and handed her one. "We've done it," she said, looking out over their land. He touched her shoulder, then bent to kiss her temple. "And we'll keep doing it." She looked down at their daughter, sleeping soundly with one fist curled near her chin. The wind moved through the tall sunflowers that lined the path below, their gold heads nodding in the breeze. Everything they had now had been earned, not given. Built from the ground up, piece by piece, with nothing but quiet strength and the choice to keep going, Susanna reached for Silas's hand and held it fast. They never left that place. They grew old in the house they built, raising Mercy with love and patience, tending soil and heart alike. And every evening, no matter the weather, they stood together at the edge of the porch, watching the light change, wrapped in the life they'd chosen whole, steady, lasting.